with each other to mitigate and deal with the threat of transnational crimes. We have the chair for session three, Mr. K.C. Verma. The panelists are as follows: Captain Pakon Thongjin from Thailand, Mr. Bhaskar Koirala, Director, Nepal Institute of Strategic Studies, Mr. Dasho Chewang Rinzin, Director, Bhutan, Dr. Kinza Win, Tampadipa Institute, and Mr. P.C. Haldar, Policy Perspective Foundation from India. I now hand over the proceedings to Mr. K.C. Verma. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Am I audible there at the back? Okay. It has always been my sweet privilege, if I might say so, to thank the organizers to always give me this slot after lunch when people are sleepy, and it has been my unpleasant duty to try and keep them awake. But fortunately for this session, I have with me 5 more eminent people who should be able to do so. And I shall quickly get out of the way by just laying a few, by just making a few comments about the background and the groundwork, etc. Now, the earlier sections have clearly shown that whether it's the BIMSTEC or at other places, the stated position normally is the ideal, and the implemented position is the reality. And I'm sure our panel will also come to much the same conclusion. It is devoted to the transnational crime, especially with reference to arms smuggling, narcotics, and human trafficking. Unlike terrorism and unlike other crime, there is something about these crimes which sets them quite apart from other criminal activities. All of us who have studied law would know the basic premise or the basic thought which is taught to all the students, that there's something called malum per se, that is to say, an offense or a crime which is a crime in itself, and a malum prohibitum, which is a crime on account of it being so defined in some statute. Malum per se goes against the accepted mores of society. Malum prohibitum goes according to the whims and fancies of the lawmakers. Now, because we are talking about mainly those crimes which are crimes on account of being so defined, we have to keep in mind that there are differences of opinion as to what is a crime. There are differences even from place to place and at the same place from time to time. And because of these differing perceptions, there are very often divergent opinions. Rather than taking on an example from international relations, I would like to refer to the business of prohibiting the consumption of alcoholic drinks in India. Different states within India have implemented or they have declared that they shall become dry states. That is to say that no liquor shall be sold or consumed. And this creates problems because the adjacent state does not have that prohibition. It gives rise to smuggling, it gives rise to the underworld, it gives rise to a whole lot of undesirable activity. Now, because of these divergent perceptions, even when it is matters between nations, we do have areas of friction which might not otherwise have arisen. There's also a wrong notion to refer to some of these criminal activities as victimless crimes. Very often, the perpetrator and the victim are in cahoots because both of them feel that the criminal activity is to the advantage of both parties. And therefore, the unearthing of the criminal activity or finding out what's really going on is not so much a function of what is happening, but much more a function of the alacrity with which the law enforcement agencies function. The impact also is felt in a very slow fashion. A terrorist attack is known immediately. A bomb blast is known almost instantaneously. But the impact that drugs have on a section of the population, or the deleterious effects of people smuggling, or the way the arms are trafficked, has a very long term impact. And therefore, very often, these matters get relegated to the background. There's no sense of the immediate about them. All of these activities, whether it is smuggling, narcotics, human trafficking, cybercrime, no, not cybercrime, but yes, several of these criminal activities are highly dependent on geography. If I want to commit a murder, I have to go and kill the person whom I want to kill at the place where he lives. If I want to commit a theft, I have to go where the item is which I want to steal. But if I want to move drugs from point A to point B, I can select the route, I can select the geography, I can select the time. The same holds true for people smuggling as also for arms smuggling. And therefore, the relative legal framework in different countries, the patterns of enforcement of that legal framework, the penal systems, all of them become relevant, and they are therefore interdependent. And lastly, all of these activities generate huge amounts of money, which has its impact in other forms: money laundering, terrorist attacks, etc. Now, when you bring it to an area like ours, the BIMSTEC nation states, there's also a further overlay of ethnicities, of religions, and, well, at least in the context of drugs, abuse of pharmaceutical preparations, abuse of Schedule 3 substances, which otherwise would not be included in a dialogue on these activities. Mr. Nakantala earlier referred to the fact that the BIMSTEC countries have a convention on cooperation in combating international terrorism, transnational organized crime, and illicit drug trafficking. It's a wonderful document. It's been signed by all the nation states. Not a single state has ratified it. So again, we have this gap between what is the stated objective and what is actually being achieved. But at least in terms of narcotics and human trafficking and crimes involving weapons, we do have a template available because all the BIMSTEC countries are signatories to the three main conventions on relating to drugs: the Single Convention of 61, the 1971 Convention, and the 1988 Convention. All the states are also signatories. Bhutan is not, but all the other states are signatories to the UN Convention against Transnational Organized Crime, as also the three protocols that go with it. So, in terms of an international framework for cooperation, I personally feel that there's nothing much lacking. The joint working groups and the subgroups have held several meetings, and I think the only subgroup which has probably not met till now is the one on trafficking of persons. I think Bangladesh is to hold it shortly. So, our deliberations today are probably in the same vein, and it would be great if during the presentations my colleagues here are able to bring out those points which we need to kind of point out, because this forum is not really cannot be really said to be a formal BIMSTEC platform, and therefore I'm sure we have far more leeway than is available to even some of us here who would otherwise be on a formal BIMSTEC platform. So without any further uh, uh, ado, I would request we'll start from that side, Mr. Koirala, to start the proceedings. We'll first go around this way, 10 to 12 minutes each, and then we'll come back. Uh, I think the closing statement of 2 minutes at the end would be acceptable to everyone. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Verma, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, thank you, first of all, to the Vivekanand Foundation for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. The topic, transnational crime, arms smuggling, narcotics, and human trafficking. It's a very big and complex issue for sure, because it's essentially a global issue. It's murky, it's shady, it's amorphous, so hard to put your finger on it. But let me make it even more complicated by putting this in the context of Nepal. I'm from Nepal, so I will try to give you a perspective from my country. I'm not an expert on transnational crime, but I will try to give you the perspective from Kathmandu. So, as you all know, there have been very big changes in Nepal since starting in around 1996. There was a armed insurgency. Now that has been peacefully resolved. After more than 2 centuries of monarchy, Nepal now has shifted to a federal republican order. Power is being rapidly devolved, decentralized away from Kathmandu to several states and lower still to even the ward level. In a small country of approximately 28 million people, there is ongoing intense political jockeying between some 3 or 4 political parties, forces, and not just that, but intense rivalry within these political parties and frequent government change. So I think that in the last 11 years, 10 or 11 years, there have been 10 different governments, coalition governments. Because of this, there is also the politicization of the bureaucracy, and unfortunately, even I would say the same holds true for the security services, and that's very important for us because we are looking at a very nuts and bolts issue here as it concerns transnational crime. All of this is happening in the context of an outwardly expanding Chinese state, especially under the Belt and Road Initiative. The effects of the developments in Western Tibet. I visit Tibet almost every year. I can see how quickly the things are changing there. Um, uh, and how Nepal has to deal with this, especially because we have very weak infrastructure along the northern border. So how Nepal deals with China in a way that she did not have to in the past. You add that to the mix of all the above things that I already mentioned. Um, this is Nepal is in a very challenging situation right now. What I find is that the marked increase in the engagement with China has tended to spike the interest of the United States and the European Union in Nepal. And one of the things we see as a result is the proliferation of NGOs and INGOs. In fact, now even China has begun to um, uh, enter the NGO, INGO sector, and it supports a number of its own organizations. So obviously, all this means that the authority of the state has become gradually weakened in Nepal. So in short, the Nepalese state, I would argue, is a weak state, currently a weak state, and still going through transition and consolidating itself. Given this fact, how does Nepal deal with something as sophisticated as transnational crime related to arms smuggling, smuggling of narcotics, and human trafficking? How does Nepal do so within the framework of BIMSTEC? As you may recall, immediately after the latest BIMSTEC summit held in Kathmandu, a joint military exercise, BIMSTEC member states, was held in Pune. in which Nepal unfortunately pulled out at the last hour. Personally, I believe that Nepal should have taken part in that exercise, but the point I'm trying to make is that Nepal did not, and this itself demonstrates the fragmented nature of the domestic political environment, all of which, I mean, I've already alluded to that above. The leadership in Nepal does need to think very carefully and seriously about the invidious nature of transnational crime and the long-term implications if the issue is not tackled head-on and in a concerted manner. BIMSTEC also needs to expand its capacity, I think, to deal with the issue of transnational organized crime in the Bay of Bengal region. And I don't think a BIMSTEC secretariat of some 10 or 15 personnel, if I'm not mistaken, the secretariat has some 10 or 15 staff and an annual budget of under 300,000 US dollars is going to be sufficient to tackle the issue of transnational crime. I would also point out that the sector within BIMSTEC that deals with counterterrorism and transnational crime conducts its business through the Joint Working Group on Counterterrorism and Transnational Crimes, and is divided into 6 subgroups. I won't list the subgroups, but there, there narcotics, intelligence sharing, legal, anti-money laundering, so on and so forth. And I went through this and I saw that Nepal is not a lead shepherd in any of these. A very important state like Nepal, located in a very sensitive area, is not part of these groupings. I found that quite something that we need to think about. So it's now let me move on to because the topic that has been given here, it suggests that BIMSTEC needs to further work on a comprehensive approach to effectively tackle the issue of transnational crime. It's easy to talk about the need for international or this kind of sub-regional comprehensive solutions to tackle transnational crime, but it's hard to design and implement these solutions, I think, and to do so solely through the measures related to law enforcement or strategy of going after top criminals or criminal leadership. That is not maybe adequate, so something has to change. There's a need to consider some fresh ideas and perspectives, and I think in this context, I would just put it out to begin with here. I think BIMSTEC needs to commission some kind of an independent, high quality research effort over and above the secretariat. Needs to be maybe outside of that to get information. Let me go on to talk about how do we understand organized crime, not just drugs, but just flows in general of money, illicit money, flows of people, flow of endangered species. It's certainly a very complicated thing. It's interdependent, criminal economy. There are flows inside the region within BIMSTEC, but we must also understand the extra-regional movements and flows. We need to look at it very holistically, how these flows are connected to North America, to Europe, to Africa, to Greater Asia, so on. How do we look at and understand different groups? Some groups that are more transnational in the exact meaning of that term and well-financed versus smaller ones, more provincial groups, criminal gangs that are more territorial. How are we going to map out the interlinkages between these kinds of groups who are playing this kind of fundamental roles, and which groups are more ancillary? That's something that I think has to be understood within the context of BIMSTEC in this question. What are we within BIMSTEC doing in terms of comparing the whole of government solutions? How can we compare the different roles of the military, the police, the intelligence services within different member states of BIMSTEC? within the context of their laws, respective laws and constitutions. Um, it seems to me we need to have a very clear understanding on this question as a foundation on which we can move forward. There's a difficulty in understanding and tackling transnational organized crime. So if you look at if you look at this in terms of like a criminal economy, there are these groups that can shift between making money in one sector and then very rapidly shift to making money in another. So making money in the illicit sector and then making money in a legal sector. How are we going to understand that? What is the relationship between these two? Um, and it's not all just about narcotics trafficking. Criminal groups have a portfolio of activities that include contraband, extortion, kidnapping, human smuggling. So how to assess this? How does BIMSTEC, how do the BIMSTEC countries understand this in a very organic and a holistic way? Then there's the issue of legitimate business versus the informal economy and how things like logistics, um, money laundering, and legitimization of wealth, how these things are all related. So therefore, the key is not only a whole of government, comprehensive approach, but a multifaceted, coordinated, adaptive approach. Very quickly, BIMSTEC countries may also like to look at certain centers of gravity, for instance, as the organization considers solutions to transnational crime. So going after the resources that allow these transnational crimes to happen, corruption, impunity, political will. So resources, this may be one of the core solutions. Going after the resources, the financial or resource flows, and going after these will impede the ability of transnational crime to occur in the first place, to buy arms, to use legitimate logistics, to engage in corruption. So the resources, that's one cycle of corruption, the way in which corruption is used to keep the, yes, the very important role of corruption. Then you have a political will. I mean, is there a political will within the communities to tackle this kind of transnational crimes? Because when you start getting at these crimes, there's very big disruptions. How are these countries going to deal with this and so on? So let me just cut it. I have a lot more to say here, but I don't let my other colleagues speak. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koirala. I'm sorry I had to cut you short, but then you posed a very large number of relevant questions. And I think before we find the answers, we really have to pose those questions. I now call upon Captain Hangin to make his presentation. In the morning, reference was made about cybercrime and how cybercrime was not really covered in any of the sessions here. Captain Hangin is setting that right. He'll be using PowerPoint presentation. May I request you to start while they are setting up your presentation?
Can you give me the pointer? Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my first of all, I have to say thank you to BIMSTEC for your kind invitation to me, and most importantly, gave me a great opportunity to taste the real, authentic Indian food here because I love Indian food so much. So I have to say that I'm really excited to be the youngest panelist with the least experiences in the field today. But yeah, and I will try my best and try to keep myself as calm as possible. So let me today I will talk about the transnational crime in Thailand and also in ASEAN. So let me briefly introduce myself because there's no my biography and information on the booklet that you have. So my name is Police Captain Pakorn Thongjin. I'm graduated from the Police Academy in Thailand, and then I got scholarship to pursue my master in the States for 2 years in cybersecurity. Just I came back and started my new position as a lecturer at the National Police Academy. Be a part of being police officer and lecturer. I'm also a researcher. I'm also a researcher, and the topic of my research is on the transnational crime in Thailand and how to enhance the management, the administration of police organization, the Royal Thai Police, to be able to deal with this issue in our region. Let me talk a little bit about the background of the research. This research has been headed by the assistant chief of police, and Dr. Bida is the project manager of this research project. Yeah, is the the inspiration of this project is from the last project that we did. The name is the comparative study on police organization and laws in ASEAN countries. We study the different models of police organization in ASEAN, and the interesting is that we found that most countries in our regions found are facing the same issue, is being problems, which is the transnational crime, and police forces in our region cannot deal effectively with the transnational crime in our region. In this research, we look at the transnational crime issue from three angles. The first one is through the lens of criminology. We want to find, motivation behind the offenders, and many other stuff from the criminological theories. And second, we look at this issue from the perspective of the policy, the nation's policy level and the public administration. And the last one, we focus, we look on from the point of view of the laws and criminal justice system in our country. These are research problem. First of all, we want to find the current problems and the obstacles that the police organizations in our region are facing to deal with this issue. And finally, we hope to come up with the best practices, or the framework that's appropriate to our region, which is the ASEAN, to together uh, concerned organization to help each other deal with the issue. So we use many scientific methodologies to conduct this research. We did a focus group at the early of this year that we get together participants from private sector and public sector that deal with transnational crime in Thailand to come up with the meaningful discussion. And several months ago, we visited the Singapore police force, because we know that they have made very effective mechanism of dealing with transnational crime. So we have a pleasure to be able to visit and learn from them. And just last 2 months ago, we invited all participants from police organization in ASEAN and law enforcement agency working in Thailand to do the second focus group in our academy. So there are many forms of transnational crimes, depending on which institution that define this issue. But in our research, we focus on just eight forms of transnational crimes that you can see in the slide. But I have just a small amount of time, so I will focus just on the cybercrime issue in our country. So this is a finding that we found from the documentary research. Yeah, I think as we know, there are many factors that that brought about the rise of transnational organized crime. Economic globalization and international conflicts is increasing, and the rise of developing markets, and of course inequality of income between the member countries is very important issue for the rise of the transnational crime. And the last one, this we have to look at transnational crime as a business. It's very profitable business. You know, they we as a authority, government authority, we we are not driven by the profit, but those guys are driven by profit, so they we they are very more creative to commit a crime. So these are the ecosystem of the transnational crime in our country that I mapped out. As you can see in my slide, the foundations are two forms of crime: the money laundering and the fraudulent travel document. Because transnational crime is concerned with many multiple domains, right? So the bad guys need the fake document to travel. So this and when they get the money, when they get the financial benefit, and they did a money laundering, they launder my money to support their criminal activity again. And you can see in the ecosystem that I just showed. So today I will give you an example, which is really an example of the cybercrime in Thailand, and it's very probably I think it's quite unique. And the first one is the call center scam. You ever heard about it? The call center scam, or the impersonation phone scam, right? And yeah, and they are last year they are increasing so much. There are rise of this crime. But after we set up the task force, and I will talk later, with very good support from our government to set up this task force, we can decrease the number of this crime dramatically. So cybercrime, there are two important forms of cybercrime in our country that we found a lot. The first one is romance scam, romance scam, or online love scam. And I will talk later about the detail. And internet fraud, use the internet to deceive the innocent people to send the money, transfer the money, or buy the fake stuff, something like that. I will skip the human trafficking. I think we will heard a lot in the session. So today, this is the modus operandi of the call center scam. There are many multiple countries involved in these criminal activities. The head of the syndicates of these criminal syndicates are in Taiwan, but they come to Thailand and recruited many Thai people to work and to set up the call center in many countries such as China, Taiwan, Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia, and UAE. And when they were there, and they use VoIP, voice over internet protocol, to call the victim in Thailand to receive their money and transfer their money using the underground banking or the cash deposit machine to to transfer the money back to foreign countries. And right now, this is the new trend of the techniques that they are increasingly use. They like instead of using ATM machine to deceive, or to deceive the victim account, and they the money to multiple accounts and change the form of money to the cryptocurrency, and then transfer to foreign countries. And it's very hard for the authority to trace back or to investigate the cybercrime, and so we cannot like seize the money before being transferred to foreign country. This but there are many countries involved in this criminal activity, and the the most of the call center that we found are in Malaysia, 34%, and yeah, and nationality of the vendor is actually Thai people, but they work in other countries. Okay, and yeah, of course they impersonate themselves as a police officer, as the most authority, and they claim, yeah, this the reason in Thailand, 45% they claim that your money is involved in money laundering activity. Yeah, the time, yeah, the most of the incidents happen during the day 9 to uh, uh, 3 p.m. Yeah, most of the victims are female, and they are well educated. They are well educated. This romance scam, you know the modus operandi of the romance scam. There's the increase in the use of social media in among Thai people, right? So, but there is no awareness among them. So this have come occur. They are from other countries, from the Nigerian. They created the fake Facebook account, and they try to make a friend with the Thai female, and try to, after she fell in love with them, and they told them they're gonna marry her, and but they ship their money or their stuff from state, something like that though, and finally they told that their stuff were seized in the custom. So and someone, their partner in Thailand, called them, right, to told that you have to pay a fee for him, and your stuff will be released. Okay. Yeah, most of the victims are females. So yeah, this is a solution right now in Thailand. This is a task force, we call it tactics. Yeah, these many organizations, domestic and international, involved in this task force. And this is the last chart that I want to show you. There are very dramatic decrease in transnational crime in Thailand. So I don't have. So the last example that we show you, this the last case that we just disrupted the call center syndicate in Vietnam. In my academy, we have many Vietnamese police cadets. So this cadet is he is the alumni of our academy, and he was very good coordinator to help our police chief to disrupt the call center syndicate in Vietnam. So this kind of tangible, like the concrete example of international cooperation, and it can benefit our future. So I will finish end my presentation with this example as a concrete example for international cooperation in the future to deal with transnational organizations. I think you don't have any, I don't have any time. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Captain. That was a very comprehensive presentation on cybercrime in your area. I'm sure the experience of many other countries would be much the same. I couldn't help noticing an interesting small little thing there, that Bangkok has the largest number of active Facebook users in the world. I'm quite surprised about that. I thought that privilege belonged to Delhi. But in any case, I wish we'd had more time to look at that slide which you had made on recommendations. But nonetheless, thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive presentation. Now, may I request Dr. Shivan to share his views.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the very outset, I would like to join the other speakers in extending our deepest appreciation and gratitude to the Vivekananda International Foundation, the BIMSTEC Secretariat, and also the National Security Council Secretariat for having us represented at this very important dialogue. I would also like to confess that for me personally, at the BIMSTEC level, this is my first association in a dialogue on this subject. So I come with very limited expertise and also experience to say much about regional security issues. So from that perspective, I see myself more as a beneficiary here in the two-day deliberations than as a contributor. In the context of the theme for this session on transnational crime, arms smuggling, narcotics, and human trafficking, I think I can only share a few thoughts with regard to narcotics, drugs, and controlled substances, and not really much on arms smuggling or human trafficking, because fortunately at this point in time, for so long indeed, Bhutan has not really been having issues with regard to arms smuggling or human trafficking. And thankfully, we will not have these issues in the future as well. I was so excited that this morning the first chair was in fact mentioning of Bhutan as perhaps the only country having happiness in its constitution. So I just wish that we remain that way with less of these issues. However, I will take this opportunity to share a few thoughts with regard to narcotics and drugs, because this is not only an emerging issue, but in fact this is now becoming an issue in Bhutan that needs some kind of serious attention. And of course, given the geographical location of Bhutan as just having two neighbors, China on the north and India on the other sides, and of course as a south-facing Himalayan country, sharing very close and cordial relationship with India in almost all spheres. Our challenges, unfortunately, are also mostly within our southern borders, particularly in the context of this subject. Mr. Verma was mentioning about aspirations versus realities. And I personally feel that while at the level of regional groupings like this, the aspirations may be collective, but when it comes to solving issues on the ground, helping each other really face the reality, solve problems, I think actions can be the collective or individual. And oftentimes, the issues related to drugs, we are told over 90% of the substances, controlled substances, narcotics that are getting imported into Bhutan are basically from the three major towns borders we share with India. And that's understandable because we share border with India and not the other BIMSTEC countries. This, of course, has been an issue that has been raised at different bilateral platforms as well. We do the track 2 dialogue with India, and of course, Mr. Verma and we were together last year discussing this very issue. And the unfortunate thing is the affected parties, particularly in our case, are the youth. And this is becoming even more challenging in the face of our youth, particularly in the face of youth unemployment in the country at over at over 10%. So this is a serious issue that we are currently facing, and of course within Bhutan we have the legislative tools, the frameworks working both on demand side and to some extent on the supply side. But I think particularly this is kind of becoming a vicious cycle, egg first or chicken first kind of a situation, whether it's the demand that's driving the supply or whether because there is supply there is demand. And I guess since we are talking in a regional context, this could be something which other members also can draw from, because if it can happen with Bhutan, it can certainly happen bilaterally across borders with any other countries. And most of the substances that are currently abused in Bhutan by especially our youth are actually pharmaceutical drugs. And sometimes we find that across the border, even there are vendors who sell some of these controlled substances over the counter. And then I think also in terms of information sharing, we have discussed a lot about the need for information sharing this morning. I think there are limitations there as well. So on the whole, drugs, narcotics, controlled substances abuse is an issue that is really that Bhutan is facing, and this continued dialogue with India is happening. Perhaps there could be more that could be done on the supply side. That's what we feel. And personally, also, I feel sometimes the issue I think need to be looked at, and we need to understand and recognize the issue and the seriousness of the issue itself, and not really in terms of the proportion or the relative proportion. Because if we are having this issue, for example, with India, and India is such a huge country, in the context of India, the issue may be not as felt as severe as we do, because for a country of 700,000 people, the death of a single person is a great loss for the country. So I think the issue needs to be recognized and appreciated. Of course, I'm just giving the example of Bhutan and India, the things happening at the border, but this is something I guess all the 7 members in different spheres, different challenges that we are facing, I think this is applicable. It's not really about the proportion, it's really about the seriousness of the issue, particularly to the affected parties. So in that light, I think the need for such forum, the need for continued dialogue, and also the need for, I think, strict enforcement, taking drawing from the collective aspiration and collective understanding, I think is important. So, yeah, I think that is all I have got to share. As I mentioned earlier, I think I'm here more as a beneficiary than as a contributor. But I just thought I will share these few thoughts and also raise the issue, particularly on the narcotics and drugs, because this is becoming a serious issue for Bhutan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dasho. In keeping with the happy nation, you shouldn't have even taken the 9 minutes that you took. You should have taken nothing more than 3 minutes, because, as you said, it's a question of scale. Well, I might mention here, though, it's not really so much of a bilateral issue. I think the BIMSTEC member states do need to look at the matter of abuse of what are called Schedule 3 substances of the Single Convention, as also the abuse of pharmaceutical preparations. India does produce a very large amount of pharmaceutical products, and even, let's say, 100 strips of spasmoproximon going over to Bhutan would probably treble the seizures that you make during the course of 1 year. But it is a serious issue. In fact, it's also a serious issue within India. For example, most of Punjab, the problem which arose was not so much poppy straw or opium or any of what are classified as the hard drugs. It was more an abuse of pharmaceutical preparations. And we are acutely aware of the constant dialogue that we have with Bangladesh on the basis of the codeine based syrups, which find their way into Bangladesh and cause a real problem there. We also have a similar issue with Myanmar across that Tamil border. So, may I assure you, Dashu, we are awake and alive to it, but it does cause problems when a product is absolutely legitimate. You can't really place controls on cough syrups or and you implementing the um, drugs and I mean what we have in India is something called the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. So lipsticks and spasmoproximon get mentioned in the same breath. But that aside, I now call upon Dr. Kinzowin to make his presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to all of you. I'm sure for all of you, as well as for me, this has been a very fascinating day. I've really benefited a lot from the rich presentations and discussions. Most of the presentations this morning were nothing short of brilliant. Now, I knew this. It was my third trip to Delhi just this year. And so when I got this invitation from the Indian embassy at very short notice, I asked, is anyone going from the government or from the military? And the answer was no, because it's a very short notice. So we're here, and my friends here. So I've been listening to these all very innovative views and perspectives, fresh thinking this morning, like, for instance, the need to look at the Westphalian state system in a new way. Now, on the topic of this session, the prevalence of transnational crime is virtually ubiquitous today. And on specifically arms, narcotics, and human trafficking, there are circumstances and histories particular to each commodity, if I may use that word. It also happens that the preconditions and sequelae are not limited to each individual country. There are interconnections, spillovers, and impacts. That's why we have to reiterate that addressing these problems cannot be achieved by each country alone. That's just setting the tone. To give one pertinent example, as you've been saying, a long time ago, a lot of acetic acid came from India across the border. It's a perfectly legal industrial chemical in India. But once it crosses the border, it goes to what we call the refineries, where raw opium is refined into heroin. And it becomes, the acronym is AA, all of that. I'm not putting the blame on any particular country, but it's just that they are used for this. In those days, the American Drug Enforcement Administration was very active in Myanmar, and I assisted in preparing reports for that. But they were just too linked to the old junta, the regime, and they had, as in the United States, very serious interdepartmental problems with State Department, the Treasury Department and the DEA. So they are not in very good regard now. So now, in 2018, decades later, the Myanmar Deputy Home Minister has to admit, and I like his frankness, that they have virtually no control over the import of precursor chemicals. The trend has changed. It's not so much heroin and opiates. They're still around, by the way. Now we have, and I think even more serious scourge, known as methamphetamines, and also ADS, which is the acronym for amphetamine-type stimulants. It's a very big business, cheap, and the level of addiction all over Myanmar is very high. And connected to that, I'm sure you all know from Myanmar's history that drugs and drug profits feed into armed conflicts that have been raging for 70 years. And finally, we have to pose the question whether drugs are being used as a political weapon. It's very serious and very murky. You can't really nail it down, but always the feeling is there. Now, I'm only going to show one map because it's, let's say, really illustrative, you know? And it was prepared by the Asia Foundation, map of Myanmar. And what I want to point out is that the hatched areas, the shaded areas, are areas that are under the control of what we call the ethnic armed organizations. We have about 100 of them. It's very surprising. And the circles by the size show the number of armed conflicts that have been raging over the years. I'm sorry, the little box is very small, but they've been very quantitative about it. And it shows on the size of the circles the number of clashes that have occurred over the years. Now, just take a quick look at it. You will see that most of these problem areas are on the eastern border. You know, they're a little bit on the northern Rakhine, which is close to Bangladesh. And so I would say this map is self-explanatory when it comes to the source of the arms and the weapons. You know, nobody says it openly, but we know that large amount of arms, you know, not only small arms, infantry weapons, but also even armored personnel carriers, heavy machine guns, missile launchers. Where do they come from? The border with porous, we share very long borders with the biggest countries in Asia, you know, and I would say a large proportion of that comes across the border is unregulated. So, like we say, is it just an arms smuggling or arms trafficking issue, or is it a civil war issue, or is it an ethnic aspirations issue? You know, and the peace process is still going on, you know, and we don't know where it'll end. When Mr. Koirala describes Nepal, he could have been describing Myanmar very clearly what is happening in Myanmar state. You see? So we have to be very frank about these things. And it's not just arms, you know. Well, you see, there are very little armed robberies, for instance, in Myanmar, unlike in the Philippines, for instance, and unlike in the United States. There are severe penalties if you carry guns, but just you go into the jungle and you find lots of soldiers, troops, some of them teenagers, carrying assault weapons, assault rifles, and anything even bigger than that. So that's the reality in Myanmar. The other things that are smuggled are, like, for instance, cars, liquor. A lot of cars, I think, are smuggled in from Thailand. I think many of those cars are stolen. But they cross the border, there are payoffs, and now you find that the streets of Yangon are choked with traffic. Only part of them are legal. The rest could have been smuggled in. You could even say that Myanmar is a kind of a smuggler's paradise. What I feel particularly painful is that much of wildlife is being smuggled too. We've lost, well, we have lots of teak forests and jungles. There's a big tiger population. Most of it has been decimated because every part of a tiger is of medicinal value in China. The same thing is happening with elephant skins, for goodness sake, you know, because they are a medicinal ingredient, and elephants are just being shot and killed just for their skin. And this is also, let's say, a kind of sequelae from the years of isolation when Myanmar was closed off. And that accounts for many of the problems that we are facing today. And human trafficking, that's also very sad. A writer, remarked to me that just look at the per capita incomes of Myanmar and China and see the big difference. And it's no surprise that Myanmar women are being marked out into China. You know? And you know, this big disparity between men and women in China because of the one-child policy. And there's a shortage of marriageable women in China. And it's not limited to Myanmar alone. Many Vietnamese women are also trafficked into China, perhaps even more than in Myanmar. And we know now with the new technologies, IT and everything, the sophistication of the criminal networks, not only in and around Myanmar, but everywhere in the region. So if you look at, let's say, how do we address them? Look at the root causes. I think this debate also extends on the war on terror. What are you going to do? Are you going to fight the terrorists using military, police, you know, drones? Or are you going to address the root causes like poverty, radicalization? I think we'll have to do both, if you have the capabilities. And so we have to look into the political economies of each country and each crime situation, incomes, inequalities. You just can't look at the growth rate. Of course, the country grows and per capita income may grow, but there are huge inequalities and huge disparities, which is not being recognized in much of the world today. Myanmar has very good relations with the rest of BIMSTEC, and I think if we were to just give one recipe for the way ahead, which I endorse very much, it would lie in friendly advocacy. If you look at the countries of BIMSTEC, especially countries like Myanmar, and also, if I may mention, in Nepal, there are big gaps in capabilities, and state capacities, And I think trying to address and change them, state reform, will take a long time. We have to do the best with what we have. And for countries which are more advanced in capabilities, it would be very opportune for them to apply a kind of friendly advocacy. I've always been against isolation. The isolation of 26 years was so disastrous for my country, and also in the strengthening the capabilities of the state sector. If I may just add a little word to what was discussed in the previous session, which was on maritime issues. Just a while ago, I was approached by 2 universities in Indonesia. I think this would be of interest to India too. The initiative came from the Indonesian Foreign Ministry, and they were proposing an Indonesia-Myanmar-India connectivity along the coasts. It's maritime connectivity, it's institutional capacity connectivity, and it's also people-to-people connectivity. And they've given the task to 2 universities in Aceh, which is in the northern tip of Sumatra. It's closest to India, closest to Thailand, and closest to Myanmar. And so I met them, and we had a very convivial time, and they said that they want to go ahead with that. I think they've come to Delhi, and the respective Indonesian embassies are backing them. So this is something that would also, I would say, feed into our purposes too, and feed into BIMSTEC's purposes as well. Of course, Indonesia is not a member of BIMSTEC, but being a leading member of ASEAN and also physically close to us, I think this is something that we could sort of piggyback upon, right? Finally, I would like to conclude with what was said at the beginning this morning. Is about our common pasts, And I would like to add that it's very simple. Even if you look at the early part of the 20th century, you look at the atlases of those days. Many of the countries in BIMSTEC, except Thailand, for instance, were colored pink, the color of the British Empire. We have, even like the language that we're using now, that much in common. And there's been a recent book published in Singapore. It's titled Esoteric Buddhism in Medieval Maritime Asia. It's very original, and I have a copy of it because I was given a gift. And original in the sense that it used esoteric Buddhism, which is Tantric or Vajrayana Buddhism, which was prevalent in India at the time. It was present in Myanmar, but it hasn't been acknowledged. It was flourishing in the Eastern Seas, especially in Java and in Sumatra, the Srivijaya Empire, Palembang, and the Majapahites in Java. So this is also another common thread that we could utilize. And of course, I'm not denying the presence of Hinduism in the Eastern Seas, and of course, even Islam, the kind of Islam that is called insular Islam, as contrasted with continental Islam, which you see in the mainland. So, like I said, personally, I and my colleagues here, we fully endorse the proceedings of today and tomorrow, and we promise our full support because this is a very timely and I think a brilliant idea to use the platform of BIMSTEC to move ahead on such an important issue as regional security. And I don't mean that I'm trying to downplay things like climate change. It's very urgent, but I think we'll just stick to the issues of the session. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor. In fact, I think you've added a new dimension which did not find explicit mention in the agenda. And I was just glancing through the BIMSTEC Convention on Cooperation in Combating International Terrorism, etc. I find there's no specific mention of animal or animal parts. So maybe the joint working group and the BIMSTEC Secretariat could have a look at this and set up. I'm not creating trouble for anyone, but it is, if a subgroup is set up on trafficking in animal parts, for which there are international conventions and the member states of BIMSTEC are members there too, it would, and I'm using a very light note for saying this, address one of the concerns of Mr. Koirala, who said that Nepal is not the lead country for any of the subgroups. So by setting up another subgroup, it would satisfy the demand raised by you. May I now request Mr. Halder to make his presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to join my panelists in extending heartfelt thanks to the Vivekananda Foundation for giving us this opportunity and to organize this very useful conference. Actually, on the subject that we were discussing, our panelists have given almost all the varieties. So I will not be repeating them, but I will try and concentrate to move away from that, because I think it's clear that there are obstacles and complexities in the issue to come to a very ready solution. One of the ways that we can avoid, and that is also by taking recourse to one of the declarations of the BIMSTEC, this thing that Fourth Summit also said that efforts should be made to identify and also disrupt the sources of finance and other support that is provided to the terror groups. Now, I think organized crime, so long as we keep seeing it as a crime, will pose much greater difficulty in resolving it. Because each country has a different set of law, and getting them to agree to a set of law, completely new one, will create problems. But can we work first on moving together to have a very workable, agreed protocol of cooperation, which would mean that before it goes to the level of the BIMSTEC summit, a number of tiers of officials from these 7 countries must meet and exchange ideas, identify doable protocols that can be put in place without why it is important is that if you look at the global issue, the organized crime and terrorism, we tend to, in some cases, I find that very different kind of an approach being made. It's no longer true. It's overlapping in many cases. In fact, FARC, which was running it in Colombia for the last 60 years, an insurgency, started off as an anti-drug movement and collaborated with the drug mafia in a big way. So the question is, the nature is mutating. That's the conflict situation evolving. And my friend from Myanmar didn't mention, but did refer to the various kinds of drugs and other activities going on in that arena. May I also add to that, that earlier when you used to see in Indian parts, it used to be the leftovers from conflicts in Laos, Cambodia coming in through the smuggled routes. Now we have brand new weapons coming through, manufactured in some geography very close by. And a recent, I think, couple of months back in Mizoram, we had 6 brand new assault rifles, which was, and Mizoram is one of the very peaceful states. So these kind of things are happening because we have concentrated on either attacking the organized crime or the terrorism separately. But actually, the common area which is being used by both the terror groups and the organized crime would be these middle areas where you already probably have laws which can be implemented. And I would draw your attention to the fact that Al Capone, one of the mafia lords in the last century in Chicago, was finally caught on tax evasion. He was not caught on any substantive thing. So therefore, we need to look at it in a slightly alternative way to develop issues. And you see, what happens is in some of the areas that geography that we share, 7 countries, there are many places where the organized crime gangs, I would say, because fortunately for us, this geography doesn't have the organized crime of the size or the kind which exists in Africa or Latin America, or for that matter, the main Americas also. The question is, can they coexist? And after some time, they start cooperating. And as the analysis and scholarly work shows, then they develop a hybrid character. The terror group becomes part of the organized crime spectrum, and the organized crime becomes almost an integral part of the so which would cover human trafficking, drugs, even our minuscule number that has gone to the IS. They have used the smuggling route and human trafficking routes to get to IS. So this is an indication that these routes are active. These routes are not possible to be used unless you have used this. So we have to hit where our laws exist, and we have to probably put our minds together to find where we find certain doable avenues, so strengthen them, and then get it approved as a BIMSTEC policy. Otherwise, well, I was told that there are various BIMSTEC conventions which have not been ratified. So we let us not look for new law or new this thing. Let us try and find out within each country's law what are the possibilities we have. If we put our minds together intensely and officers, the working level meet each other, that probably can be possible. Secondly, that we have very inadequate knowledge base to act. Even like we keep saying today, the terrorism is becoming cellular. Even the organized crime is becoming cellular. Because the real boss of the organized crime hierarchy is probably not in the front at all. The one who are being used are the local gangs. So you have to, therefore, local gangs can be tackled only through your own laws. And a very coherent operations will have to be mounted to get to the main. And when you get to the main person, which law do you actually apply? It will be the law of the country where he is found, where he has committed crime. So these are issues which are complicated. Merely saying that it should be acted upon, it will not be possible. And one suggestion, I mean, I beg to differ, that one position was, I think, Bhaskarji, you mentioned that let's go for the heads of these criminal gangs. Now, another head will come in. It's only hastening somebody's promotion. You have to actually choke the support system. In fact, globally, I would suggest that everyone interested in organized crime should also see a publication which has been published this year. It's been jointly published by Interpol, then Global Initiative Against Organized Crime, and RIFTO, a Norwegian NGO. And they have identified 1,000 routes of illicit flows. Fortunately for us, the BIMSTEC geography has only one or two, but we do figure there. It becomes intense over Latin America and this thing. But for example, elephant, rhino, we figure. And also I find that pangolin is something being trafficked from Africa via these countries, and pangolin scales are demand in this thing. So wildlife is another area. But in the hierarchy of items that are being taken, drugs remains the top. Thereafter, counterfeit goods. Now, these things are, if you keep that this is part of the terror, you already have very strong conventions and commitments from the countries to deal with terror. So my suggestion is to change the narrative that this is the source of funding, and therefore attack that. So this is drugs, counterfeit goods, and then trafficking of all variety. It harms human beings. In fact, Bhaskarji, I mean, another thing, we have the trafficking of women. Unfortunately, both India and Nepal, they figure both as a destination as well as origin, which is a very sad and shameful thing to happen, but it is there. Then you of course have environment crime. So environmental crime is illegal mining, illegal wood cutting. I think in India we are familiar with it. The areas where conflict arose, the militancy arose, these things were seen. Illegal mining, illegal wood felling, and other activities of extortion taxes, as the very gentlemanly manner they say. Extortion and taxes would mean that you cut your wood or cut your any material that's trying to take. There's a unauthorized barrier on the road, and the local militia, I mean armed group, is collecting funds from you. This we have seen for years in the areas which is in Northeast and other places in India. I'm sure that will be the experience in some of the other parts of the same geography that we're talking. Now, these are the sources of fund for the underground as well, but there are sometimes also being channelized through the organized crime who do the collecting, etc. You may not have actually a man from that organization there. So these are the areas where we have to tackle. But these things will happen in your area. So you need to get therefore to the money laundering stage. And when we go to the money laundering stage, we come to your cyber crime. Sorry. So cyber crime, as soon as we reach, the money laundering is another aspect which needs a very serious look at it. But these are doable things, provided we try and connect it not merely to the organized crime, but as something which is going towards the terror groups, and therefore use the existing mechanism. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Mr. Haldar. I'm afraid, and I do apologize to the panelists for having been somewhat unkind to them, but we started the session 20 minutes late, and we've managed to exactly hit 5:30. Now, if the House agrees, can we have 15 minutes left for any questions, answers, or is anyone really tied down with the 17:30 hours deadline? Okay, so motion taken as passed. We shall have we'll have a 15-minute question answer session. I was thinking of requesting the panelists to air their views before we go to the floor. And may I very quickly ask you, I'll again give you an opportunity to sum up later, but if there's any question which you'd like to put to a co-panelist or any clarification, now's the time. Otherwise, hold your peace. Okay, fine. To the floor. May I request you please kindly identify yourself and yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Yogendra Kumar, former ambassador.
Yes.
I have actually two questions. One is that I do not know how much of a threat or a challenge is counterfeit currency, its crossing of borders, it is for the BIMSTEC region as a whole. And secondly, when you mention about cybercrime, it also earlier we'd heard about social media being abused practically for state subversion, political subversion. So I'm wondering to what extent there's a scope for cooperation amongst the BIMSTEC member countries to actually address these challenges. Thank you.
May I ask anyone else so that we'll take the questions all together? Can you please pass the microphone there?
I would like to know the panels, not anyone in particular, but the panel's views on legalization of drugs as a means of tackling organized crime in narcotics.
Okay. Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Brahmanand Garge. I'm from VIF. Sir, I have a question. Any of the co-panelists can answer about it. The legalization or the legal measures which we can suggest for extradition treaties of which will facilitate a smooth extradition of criminals and terrorists at a BIMSTEC as an entity as a whole. Can we suggest certain measures on that?
One last question, one more, yes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to you. Actually, if I can be permitted, since I'm director handling connectivity and security in the BIMSTEC Secretariat, so few of the points I'd like to put forward. One thing regarding the BIMSTEC Convention on Cooperation in International Terrorism and Transnational Organized Crime and Illicit Drug Trafficking. So out of 7 member states, that has been ratified by 6. Only we are waiting from ratification from Bhutan, and they have assured us that after the formation of new government, and probably they will send the instrument of ratification to us. And regarding the BIMSTEC Convention on Cooperation on that is mutual legal assistance in criminal matters, out of 7 member countries, 6 have given their readiness to sign the convention, and we are awaiting this readiness from Bhutan. So we are also expecting soon they will give the readiness to sign the convention. Regarding the question of extradition, already one draft has been prepared on BIMSTEC Convention on Extradition, which we are supposed to discuss at this time in a meeting in Kathmandu on 30 and 31st of October. Of course, we couldn't discuss that, and there's another convention on trafficking against persons. We had the second round of negotiation in Kathmandu on 30 and 31st of August, this October, in a subgroup meeting. So we could finalize quite a few number of articles. Then under convention on BIMSTEC Convention on Transfer of Sentenced Persons, that has also been drafted and partly negotiated. So quite a few conventions which are in the process of being ratified, finalized, or being negotiated. So I just thought I'll just give a brief.
Thank you very much for that clarification. So I take it that the question relating to MLATs and extradition is addressed. Now we are left with 3 basic points. One is counterfeit currency, second one is cybercrime, scope for something, and the legalization of. May I, on the cybercrime part, first request Police Captain Thongin to give his remarks, then anyone else, any of the other panelists are most welcome. Would you like
Right, sir, thank you for your question. Yeah, I don't know much about the cooperation between BIMSTEC member to in terms of dealing with cybercrime But as you know, as in my presentation, I just know, from my experience and as a police officer and scholar, there are strong cooperation to deal with to fight against cybercrime among our ASEAN members. But to be honest, I don't know much about the some kind of cooperation between the members of
Would
the
you like to
BIMSTEC.
address that, sir?
About social media, I think it has to be done by I think the question was from you. It has to be done by the country which feels aggrieved from this thing, because this is a media which doesn't have really a boundary of this thing. So you need to have counter narrative to place it in a credible manner in the social media. That is where the action lies. Your other question about that will not be a very good solution, because he will shift, another person will take over.
And the moment we are in the cyberspace, we don't talk about BIMSTEC or
And
whatever. It can be just about anywhere in the world. So
you mentioned second thing about the currency. Circulation of counterfeit currency is bad in law, but going by the total circulation of money in the country, so far as India is concerned, and the total amount of circulation of counterfeit money, it's not a threat at the national level. But in the bordering areas where the currency is being distributed, the user, if he finds it's a counterfeit, he loses faith in the central government, which issues that is where the perception problem comes. So that is a serious matter. But if you are thinking, I was thinking in terms of whether it is a threat to national economy, it's a minuscule part of currency.
any other comments? Yes, on any other issue. Yeah.
So I'll answer the question on legalization of drugs. Legalization and I think decriminalization can be sort of taken together. There's quite an active movement going on in Europe. And just a while ago, Canada legalized the use of marijuana for medicine purposes. Now, Myanmar being both a big producer and a big consumer of drugs, I think this is a very urgent matter. But I don't think parliaments or many legislators or political parties are paying much attention to it. As you know, opium has been a medicine in much of Asia for centuries. It's only 20th century advances in chemistry that brought these things out. Even heroin was a very potent painkiller, and then it was abused. So now we see that consumers of just a few tablets or little bits of heroin are given long jail sentences, while the drug lords get away, and the organized crime even profits from it, and not to mention the armed groups. So this is a very lopsided situation. I think in Myanmar as well, and in other countries too, people should take a very long, hard, serious look at it, whether it can really be legalized. I'm really for it. And if I may add, it's also linked to, let's say, both legalization and decriminalization of sex work. Because we had this huge epidemic of HIV/AIDS that's linked to both drug use as well as to sex work.
The challenge is also what you legalize and what you do not legalize. And that is something which will become very serious, because this is marijuana and other things you mentioned are natural products which become this thing. But you also have synthetic pharmaceutical drugs, and one which is being used in the IS areas is a psychostimulant, which is just gives you that whir of mind in which you go and commit crime.
I can't deny Dr. Gupta. Yes, please.
We did have a separate session on cybercrime. But I think cooperation amongst different countries for cybercrime should be pursued, and it's right. It's not, of course, easy to handle cybercrime, but there are many models. Essentially, the agencies who are dealing with cybercrimes in different countries, they should come together, and it is really the exchange of timely exchange of information which can go towards preventing cybercrime. So I think, and cybercrime is related to terrorism and many other things. And so this probably is the point that.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. May I, as the chair of this session, add to the comments on legalization / decriminalization of drugs, soft drugs, etc. Most of the thinking on drugs has evolved over a period of about 150 years, till all these different conventions got amalgamated in the single convention of 1961. But I'd like to recall for the gathering here that the first hemp commission, which was set up, the Indian Hemp Commission, which was set up in 1890, was with the specific purpose of finding fault with hemp, that is cannabis. And the purpose was to say that please drink scotch, give up cannabis. And the Indian Hemp Commission came to the conclusion that on the whole, cannabis did not cause any damage. And cannabis was not a banned substance. It was opium which was controlled for a very long time. And all of a sudden we find that after the 1930 Opium Convention, etc., we came to the single convention in 1961 and cannabis was banned. And it was banned in all the signatory states, which is you, me, them, everybody. And then the Americans started legalizing it in their various states. Now Canada has done it. Tomorrow, if I do it, I shall be contravening the provisions of a treaty that I have signed. But in fact, the second United Nations General Assembly special session on drugs, which had reviewed the situation in, I think, 2008. The third one was held in 2016, and there was an expectation that the soft drugs, at least cannabis, would be decriminalized. Unfortunately, the whole UNGAS, that special section, got hijacked by the more conservative people. And what was expected by the whole world didn't come about. In fact, one of the underlying precepts, one of the underlying beliefs of the whole of the drug administration and drug production is the belief that mankind has a right to freedom from pain. As you said, it's been used as medicines. And yet, we keep on creating these walls. I'm sorry for getting carried away, but the non-availability of morphine for terminally ill cancer patients in India is something which has bothered me for a very long while. More so when we produce morphine and it is exported out to various other countries. Now, I still have 3 minutes, 4 minutes to go. Very quickly, can I request in reverse order the panelists to, in bullet form, make your recommendations or whatever additional you want to say. Just 2 minutes each, please, or less.
One recommendation which I forgot to mention, that to begin with in the field of crime, not terror crime, but crime. Can we have can we pool data which can be pooled and create a BIMSTEC level of data? Then we can also make it available to the researchers, etc., who can add value to it. So that how it is to be done to be thing, because we have currently we are really reacting to events with in a position. Sorry, let me complete the half a sentence.
You made your point.
in the absence of data about crime.
Okay. Yes, I would say a link to what Mr. Alda has said. In the 7 countries in BIMSTEC, the different levels of capacity, as I've said, if we could have, let's say, a more level field and try to make it possible, so that we can all cooperate and operate on the same level, that would be of great benefit.
I guess all I can say is really, I think we have heard of a lot of issues, and perhaps again this aspiration versus reality thing keeps coming to mind. And I think if we are to realize the regional aspirations of being a prosperous, peaceful, harmonious, and happy society, I guess each member just needs to do whatever it can true to the spirit of the objectives on which the regional grouping is founded. And I think there's so much that we can do. Otherwise, of course, we will keep having these dialogues, these forums, but I think at some point, if we don't really transfer into some concrete actions at the individual level, at the group's level, I think the vision of BIMSTEC may still be very far-fetched. Thank you.
Yes,
So,
Captain.
so in conclusion, I'd like to answer the drug legalization issue that the gentleman over there just raised. Yeah, there are two things that I would like to mention. The first thing, like my fellow panelists just mentioned, you know, the issue is that which drugs you are going to legalize. You know, the impact of legalization of each type of drug is different. And the second is I want to to end my session, with my personal experience when I was studying in the States, in Washington D.C., where the marijuana was legalized. You know, when you walk in the downtown of Washington D.C., you will smell marijuana. And I'm a policeman in Bangkok, but I'm not a policeman in Washington D.C. So it's very it's it's very fear. You walk with the fear, so you feel unsafe. So for me as a tourist, you know, in country in the emerging markets, like for example Thailand, our economy rely heavily on tourism, right? Tourism. So safety is very important. For me, for my personal experience, legalization of drug is not the final answer to fighting transnational crime. Thank you very much.
Finally, Mr. Koirala.
As this is a BIMSTEC think tank dialogue, I would suggest more concerted research effort on transnational crime, especially the very complicated, very dense, the criminal economy that is the foundation for transnational crime. Also, looking at the corruption within the state that allows this kind of crime to happen, also the impunity. And then finally looking at the political will, also going back to a point that was made this morning about maybe the way in which there is some level of state sponsorship for transnational crime, also looking at that question. So basically research, real-time research, I think is really something that very important.
Thank you very much. In fact, if I glance through the joint working groups, programs for cooperation, etc., they do have the mandate for doing research and development, etc., for countering terrorism and transnational crime. But ladies and gentlemen, according to my clock here, it is 1 hour and 29 minutes. I'm 1 minute away, and I think for 1 minute I can demand an applause for me for sticking to the timelines and for the panelists here. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I now return you to the Secretariat. They might have some announcements to make.
I thank Session 3 panel for their discerning comprehension and sharing their national experiences on the issue of transnational crime. Before we close for the day, I have a couple of announcements. The VIF will be organizing a dinner today at Hotel La Meridian at 7 p.m. On behalf of Director VIF, I once again extend a warm invitation to all delegates, participants, and attendees. Tomorrow evening, the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, will be organizing a special interaction followed by a networking dinner at the Indian Habitat Center at 7:30. On their behalf, again, I once again extend an invitation to everyone here. We have the vehicles waiting to take the delegates back to the hotel so that you can freshen up and return for the dinner. I think everyone will agree with me that we've had a very lively and engaging day one of the BIMSTEC think tank dialogue on security. Thank you so much. Tomorrow's session 4 will start at 9:30 hours. Thank you so much once again. Yes, sir. 7, sir. 7:30, sir. The dinner 7:30. The 9:30, 9:30. The morning session. 9:30.